وبارك عليه وعلى آله. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أقبل السعد علينا والهنا من كل جانب. أقبل سعد علينا والهنا من كل جانب. فلنا البشرى بسعد فلنا البشرى بسعد جاءنا من خير وإب. صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى على محمد صلى الله سلم. يا جمالا قد تجلى بالمشارق والمغارب. يا جمالا قد تجلى بالمشارق والمغارب. مرحبا أهلا وسهلا مرحبا أهلا وسهلا بك يا خير الحبايب. صلى على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى الله على محمد. يا شريف الأصل لذنا بك في كل نوائب. يا شريف الأصل لذنا بك من كل النوائب. أنت ملجأ كل عاص أنت ملجأ كل عاص. أنت ماوى كل تائب. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله وسلم. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله وسلم. وله شكر على ما قد حبانا من مواهب. وله شكر على ما قد حبانا من مواهب. يا كريما يا رحيما يا كريما يا رحيما جد وعجل بالمطالب. صلى على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى الله على محمد سلم. من توجه نحو بابك ما رجع من ذاك خائب. من توجه نحو بابك ما رجع من ذاك خائب. واغفر ذنب عبد واغفر ذنب عبد قد أتى نحوك تائب. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله وسلم. صلى الله على محمد عليه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, we have now reached session 6, and I want to get right into the material because we have quite a lot to cover. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to do it in a timely fashion. And this particular session, which is titled The Temperament of Your Spouse, is a very exciting session for me because I really believe that the knowledge of temperaments is extremely important in general, but in particular for marriage. And I think that someone will find that through this knowledge, not only will it be a means for you to come to know your Lord by knowledge of self, it's one of the great ways to do that, but it also is one of the great secrets of having a healthy and fruitful marriage. And this knowledge will help us be how it is that we're supposed to be. The way that we're learning how we're supposed to be, this will help us practically do that. And I must admit, what we're taking in this session is not from the Ihya Ulumuddin. This has been put together from other sources. But I really believe in the importance of this, and the idea of temperaments, and we'll very soon get into definitions and to talk about it, is not something that's foreign to the Islamic tradition. And the idea of temperament in general is something that is a part of that pre-Islamic civilizations as well. And the Muslims inherited it from the Greeks, who did a lot of work on it, in particular Hippocrates, and then others contributed throughout time, where they spoke of that 4 basic temperaments. And what this knowledge does, and just a couple disclaimers at the beginning, I urge people, especially the ones that are more scientifically inclined, and especially the physicians that are out there, and this is not evidence-based medicine, but that doesn't mean that there's not elements in truth to it. And the point of it's not to be scientifically and exactly precise. But in just when we speak about the humors and we speak about the elements that underlie all these temperaments, which we're not going to talk about that today. I'm saying if one were to speak about them, these are not things that can be scientifically detected. So when we talk about cholerics being yellow bile and that phlegmatics being having phlegm, that doesn't mean that it's that physical thing that is measured. Really what we're talking about when we talk about temperaments, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, is like an underlying energy. And we'll get into that shortly. But this is a knowledge that is extremely, extremely beneficial. And I would even go as far to say is it could save your marriage if you come to understand it. It could save your relationships with people if you truly come to understand it. And it shows us how that, yes, that we have the rulings of the sacred law, which are meant there to regulate and to govern. But there are so many different possible archetypes in relation to those particular rulings. And we do not have a monolithic way of that being a Muslim in general. Just as that we have to differentiate between that true masculinity and toxic masculinity. And we might have to make some form of differentiation as well in terms of various types of femininity. And ultimately what we want is balance. And I'm saying all that to say is that once you study these temperaments and you start to see all of the possible combinations, then you will have the keys to do the very best that you can to adhere to the principles of the sacred law and the ihsan that we should all set out to commit to. It will help you in a practical way do that because you'll know how to care for your spouse, how to show them the type of love that they need, how to mediate a conflict and so forth and so on in relation to that particular person. Now, obviously, this is, again, a large topic and there's only so much that we can do, but I want to hopefully just mention enough today to convince you of the importance of this. And my advice for every person getting married, I almost wish this would become the part of the fard ayn of getting married, is that yes, of course, you have to learn the ahkam of the sharia. Yes, of course, you have to learn a lot of other things, and hopefully we can point to some practical suggestions in the final session tomorrow about, okay, where to go from here? What am I going to do now if I'm actually really thinking about getting married? And don't worry, it's not too late. If you're still married, you can always make your marriage better, even if you have a great marriage. But I would really like to see everybody study this before they get married. And that to first and foremost, and this is where we actually must begin, there is no way that you can give to anyone if you don't know yourself. There's no way that you can ever truly help anyone else if you don't first know yourself. And there's no way of drawing near to Allah without knowing yourself. And knowing yourself is profound, and it's multi-leveled. And the statement, "Man arafa nafsuhu faqad arafa rabbuhu," is not a hadith that's attributed to Yahya bin Mu'adh al-Razi, although you'll see it sometimes attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, but the meaning is true. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. Now, when you know yourself as that incapable, you know Allah as that all-powerful. When you know yourself as absolutely needy, you know Allah as the self-sufficient. So there's deep spiritual meaning there in relation to the attributes of Allah. But also, too, is that the biggest veil between us and Allah is our own nafs, our own ego. And it's worse than 70 shaitans. And this comes in a hadith. Your worst enemy is your own self between your two flanks, between your two sides. So we have to come to know ourselves, and there's ways of doing that. And one of the techniques we can use to come to know ourselves is to study the temperaments, because this will let us know what some of our underlying tendencies are. So having said that, and more could be said there by way of introduction, what is a temperament then? The Latin word that the English word comes from, the Latin word temperamentum, means mixture, which is why that when the texts of the Greeks reached the Muslims, they translated that temperament as mizaj, because that's precisely what mizaj means. It means to mix. So your mizaj is your temperament. And the more technical, that this is standard dictionary definition, would be something along the lines of the combination of the four cardinal humors. Okay, what does that mean? And relative proportions of which were supposed to determine physical and mental constitution. Or if you look at a Wikipedia definition, consistent individual differences in behavior that are biologically based and are relatively independent of learning, system of values, and attitudes. So there's something about this is just how you are. A significantly more precise definition, which is taken from Hakim Salim Khan's book, temperament is the inherent tendency or predisposition to respond along particular characteristic patterns. Each individual reacts according to an innate psycho-emotional pattern, which makes that individual unique. Okay, that's going to definitely require a bit of unpacking. And if we want to just think of it in a very practical way, what we could call like a working definition, we could say the following. It is the sum, yani our temperament, of our natural preferences, which shapes our thoughts, ideas, impressions, and the way we tend to react to our environment and to other people. It is our predisposition to react in certain ways, hardwired in us. It is not learned or acquired through contact with our environment. That's something different. It's affected by that. It is not a product of childhood trauma or repressed memories. In a word, it is nature as distinguished from nurture. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that underlies how we are. Now, it's important to note here at the beginning as well, no temperament is a bad temperament. All temperaments could be imbalanced or they could be balanced. And so if the temperament is imbalanced, and to the degree that it's imbalanced is to the degree to which it will lead to vice and not virtue. To the degree that it is balanced, and to the degree that it is balanced will be to the degree that it leads to virtue. And each temperament will respectively have various vices and virtues that they are susceptible to. Some will be naturally easier for them, and others will be naturally harder for them, for better or for worse. If we're talking about vice, for worse, for virtue for better. So our temperament, and really when we talk about temperament, it is not the same as personality. Even though you'll have people for expert in just explain to people in a way that they understand, call it personality, but it's not personality. Personality is more of a modern term, which refers more to the whole of a person's individual patterns of behavior, thoughts, and emotions. But when we talk about temperament, we're talking about something that underlies the personality. And it is from here that you can understand, for instance, Imam al-Ghazali's discussion in book 22 of the Ihya al-Din, where he talks about, can someone's character be refined or not? And someone might think in the beginning, like, of course your character can be refined. Why could it not possibly be refined? Well, there were philosophers in his time who, being impacted by that remnants of Greek ethics, did take that position and essentially aligned your character traits with your temperament. Now, your temperament can't necessarily be changed, but it can be shaped and molded, and there's a big difference. And never can we say that, oh, this is my temperament, and use it as a way of justifying wrong. In the end, we will be held personally accountable. However, just as we have in the chapters of fiqh, najasa that is ma'fu anha. There are certain types of filth that are overlooked. It's najasa. It's legally considered to be impure, but it's overlooked. Likewise, is it people that have certain vices or certain faults based upon their temperament, it is much more likely that Allah is going to overlook those and forgive those than people who things are not as big as a struggle for them based upon their temperament. So this is the whole thing that we all have to realize, and this is why this knowledge is so important. We might know someone who committed a major wrong action, and you can't say, oh, it's my temperament. No, you're going to be held accountable for that. But you don't know. Allah Ta'ala might forgive that person because of their temperament and what they're struggling with, and it's a huge struggle for them, and might not forgive someone else for a minor infraction. We don't know. The knowledge is with Allah Ta'ala. But what learning about the temperaments does, one of the great benefits of it is it teaches us to have a good opinion of people. It teaches us to be empathetic and to make excuses for people and to know that there could be things that they're struggling with that I don't know. So temperament is not the same as personality. So the last thing that we'll say there is that nor does it lock us into patterns of reactions, although it does tell us naturally how we tend to react. And it makes certain behaviors, responses, virtues, and vices easier or more difficult for us. So, why are the temperaments then important? As we began, it is one of the great ways to help us know ourselves. And when we combine that with a study of the science of ihsan, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, and we read the great books that detail the diseases of the heart, and we come to know the way that we should be, and the faults of the tongue, and the things that we want to keep our hearts from, and the virtues that we're supposed to acquire, combined with a knowledge of temperament, combined with deep introspection in thinking about that ourselves and committing to purifying our hearts and moving towards a process of purification, asking Allah to show us our faults, that taking advice even from our critics. This is one of the 4 ways of purifying your heart, is to listen to what people who don't like you say about you. Because أَيْنَ الرِّضَى عَنْ كُلِّ عَيْبٍ كَلِيلَةٌ. If someone approves of you, they're not going to notice your faults. وَلَكِنْ عَيْنِ السُّخْطِ تُبْدِي الْمَسَاوِيَ. But if people don't like you and they're literally displeased with you, they're going to bring out your faults in great detail. That might be all they notice. Even if you have 99 virtues, they're going to notice that one fault. So we should benefit from that. We should benefit from what the critics say. And we should never be offended by anything anyone says about us, because we should have already criticized ourselves more and felt that we're in need of knowledge of self. How empowering that is. That is the road to ihsan. And then put that in the context of marriage, and then see how there's very few things, if any, there's not really anything better than marriage to really show you your faults and the points that you need working on. Marriage is the best way to do that. So it helps us know ourselves. And then we can start to understand our own strengths and weaknesses. And if we are familiar with what's called a SWOT analysis, we should do SWOT analyses on our own self. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are, we might not phrase it, we might not frame it in the context of opportunities or threats, you, that sharing or helping others. But this actually requires a little bit of work, but I highly recommend that everybody, before you get married, ask 3 to 5 of your closest friends to list for you honestly and make a covenant with them that they have to be honest and that you're not going to get offended. And you can't get offended if you take that covenant with them, that they're going to point out to you what they believe to be your strengths and weaknesses. But you want people who are going to tell you the truth. So maybe you have to do a sibling. Maybe you have to do someone who really knows you. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And what a blessing to come to know your strengths and weaknesses. That if you look at athletes, for instance, everyone has to stay within their lane. And if you know that you're a role player, that don't try to be the one who everything goes around. Play your role. Play your role as a role player. And do your role, and don't stay in your lane. Don't step out of what it is that you can do. Know your strengths and know your weaknesses. This is part of strategy in winning anything, whether it be some type of martial arts match or whether it be some type of that athletic competition. Know your strengths and know your weaknesses, and that know how to utilize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. So learning about the temperaments help us do this, and that we can learn about what is going to prevent our growth. So, secondly, temperaments are important to learn because it helps us understand and interact with others. And it's very important here to note, we don't learn the temperaments to label people, nor do we learn the temperaments that criticize people. Oh, you're so this. It's not why you learn temperaments. Is it so, oh, he's that or she's that. Oh, that's one of them. I don't like phlegmatics. I don't like cholerics. Oh, I hate melancholics and all this type of stuff. It's not why we learn temperaments. It's totally immature. That you've missed the point completely. We learn it in order to understand each other. We learn it in order to appreciate each other. And ultimately, we recognize everybody is needed. The ummah is a body. And a body is composite by nature. You have in one body eyes, ears, tongue, and everything has to be in order outwardly and inwardly. All of the limbs, the vital organs, the other organs, the circulatory system, all of the different systems in the body have to function in that be synced in order to truly, for human beings to be healthy and to be able to contribute anything. So this is how we should view other people. And we should see diversity as a strength, ethnic diversity. We should see that personality differences or temperament differences as a strength in any family, in any organization, in any community. Everyone has something to offer, and everybody has to find their role. And when we're talking about complementarity in relation to pairs, the same thing applies at the level of the group. And no one was better in bringing this out of the people than our blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the biggest disservices that we can do is to see Islam as a monolith, that there's only one way to be Muslim. This is a huge disservice, because this shuts the door for all of this diverse ways of being both a male and a female, and making contributions for both males and females alike. And there's always going to be a legal dimension to that, But there also needs to be a matching of someone's God-given gifts with what they feel passionate about, and that channeling that to some form of service. So a couple other practical reasons that this will help us with other people is that parents can learn what really motivates a particular child. How do you learn to motivate people? Different temperaments are motivated. And then in relation to communication, spouses can learn how to better communicate with their spouses and to avoid conflict that arises from disparity between temperaments. Teachers will learn how to have empathy with their students and how to tend to their needs. Al-Maqasid says of all of the etiquettes of a teacher towards the student, the very first, and yujriyuhum majra bani, is that he treats them like he would treat his own children, meaning there's a beautiful, tender, loving, compassionate relationship there. And it is built the way that a parent knows that you're in it for the long run. You're not going to give up in one go if something goes wrong with your child. The parent is in it for the long run. And this is how teachers at various degrees should be with their students. And then bosses, people who are in charge at work, will learn also what can motivate their employees, how they can communicate them, how that they can match teams and so forth. And you'll find other books that are written on this topic. I think I have a book upstairs. What's it called? That's a book on it's a catchy title. It's where they classify people into the different colors, the blues, the greens, the yellows, and the reds. Like my coworker is an idiot or something like that. It's titled like something like where it's the choleric temperament where he sees everybody else around him as stupid. And what's that? Surrounded by idiots. Yes, thank you. And I started reading it, not because I'm worried about thinking that I'm surrounded by idiots, but because it does talk about the temperaments in a modern kind of like corporate sense and basically how to work with a team at work. And there's certainly benefits in there. But this is the same thing. It's all rooted in this, right? And so even though scientifically, medically speaking, that the medical world has moved away from this, this still remains in many traditions. The Chinese have a concept of temperaments, albeit it's slightly different than that Unani Tib tradition that's rooted in the Greek tradition. There's in the Ayurvedic tradition, they also have a concept of temperaments. And it's taken on the form throughout the centuries, and it was very much a part of Western intellectual history, even to fairly recent times, where you have that Carl Jung having a book on personality types, and then most recently, the Myers-Briggs personality test, which divides it into 16 different categories. So these things are all roughly talking about the same thing, although they're slightly different. When we talk about temperament here, we're talking about the understanding of temperament that Muslims inherited and contributed to from the Greeks primarily. And having said that, there is a lot of very good literature that Catholics especially have on this topic, and that I'm hoping to research that more, because I really think it's very, very helpful, especially using it for the spiritual path. And in fact, one of the first books that I was going to recommend, I have several books up here, which I guess we can send out the links or send out a picture or however you want to do it. But this is one of the first that I would recommend, called The Temperament God Gave You by Art and Lorraine Bennett. You don't have to write it. We can send it all out. And even though it's written that by a Catholic, just kind of skip over some of the stuff about, that we would consider to be shirk and not believe in. But it's extremely helpful, extremely helpful. And then the other that I would recommend is Alex Carberry, who's a Muslim, who studied with Hakim Salim Khan, and his spiritual inclined. It's called Know Yourself. This is very helpful. And he has Know Yourself, where he talks about all four temperaments. And then he has that one book on the choleric temperament, one on the sanguine. He's currently working on the melancholic, and we eventually will have one for the phlegmatics. There's also Hakim Salim Khan's An Introduction to Islamic Medicine, which is also very beneficial. And that's a lot more technical, because he starts talking about the humors, the elements. He starts talking about the seasons, And there's a whole theory behind all of this. And each temperament has a season that is associated with it, characteristics associated with it. And there are objective criteria, and he lists 10 on how you can actually determine someone's temperament based upon their skin texture and the nature of their body and so forth and so on. And then a more modern book, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, just to show you that this is a really, like, if you get into these books, I guarantee you will come back, you'll be like, thank you so much for suggesting that, right? It's nothing short of life-changing. I'm not joking. Right? This can really, really help. This one's called Personality Plus. It's kind of a more modern twist to it, but it's very practical and very helpful. And I don't know if I know how to pronounce her last name, but her first name is Florence, Littaur. Anyone knows French? I took French. I should be able to pronounce that. Anyone that got the best, how do you pronounce that? Littaur or something? I don't know. Anyhow, that I recommend all of these. And this is all really a starting point. And then you could see all of the places we could potentially take this as Muslims. Not just for healing, because it relates to healing, but it relates to diet. It relates to our interactions with other people. And it's one of the great ways that helps us Islamicize various sciences that can be Islamicized, and moving away from an industrialized approach, which not only in relation to medicine, but this one-size-fits-all type of approach to everything where everybody's kind of like the same and there's just one way of doing it for everybody. That is so radically different to what we're taught. That's not the case in terms of one's physical health, nor is that the case in terms of one's spiritual or mental health, and so forth and so on. So these things are very, very important to recognize. Now, we're going to look at the 4 temperaments now. And this is not going to be brief. We're going to go into a little bit of depth. Allah al-Musta'an. And so I hope that I can get through this. That Amjad is in his office up there laughing at me, as he always does when he sees how many pages I print out for these things. So I'll do my best to get through this. But, here, Bismillah. So we're going to start with the sanguine. And the sanguine, their season is spring. So that's almost the season that we're in. And one of the great ways to come to intuit the temperaments, because when you study with Hakim Salim Khan, and by the way, I'm a beginner when it comes to these things. I did study them in a basic way with Hakim Salim, but I am a beginner, I am admitting. But it's fascinating to me, and I hope that I can learn more. But when you do study it with someone like Hakim Salim Khan, he's interested in the theory, but more important in the theory, learning to intuit how these temperaments work. And so one of the things he tends to do is gets you to reflect upon spring. If you want to understand the sanguine, understand spring and what happens in spring. You want to understand the choleric, understand summer and what happens in the summer. You want to understand the melancholic, understand fall and what happens in fall. You want to understand the phlegmatic. Then you want to understand what happens in the winter. And then each has an element. You think about the characteristics of air, and that will help you understand the sanguine. You think about the characteristics of fire, and that will help you understand the choleric. You think about the characteristics of earth, and that will help you understand the melancholic. You think about the characteristics of water, and that will help you understand the phlegmatic. وهكذا. And then when they talk about the different humors, the black bile, the yellow bile, the blood, and the phlegm, that's not like actual like fluid, right? That's an underlying energy is probably the best way to conceive of it. But these things all go hand in hand. And then they have characteristics, dry and that hot, wet and cold, وهكذا. That different places in the spectrum of those. And then this informs how it is that we should exercise. This informs how it is that we should eat. This informs the type of remedies that we take if we're taking natural medicine. This informs the type of herbs that we are given. This informs the type of tea or coffee that we should drink and not drink. And so imagine that learning how to eat according to your temperament and how food can upset the balance of your temperament, where you actually make yourself more susceptible to do things that you shouldn't through eating, as opposed to eating properly. And we were just speaking about that earlier with someone, is that you and I all know, if you've eaten a lot, your emotions intend to rage much more when you're on a full stomach, especially if you eat very strong foods like meat, as opposed to foods that aren't as strong, things like vegetables and fruits. So that these things are very, very important. So the first one we'll begin with is the sanguine, is this temperament's name. And we're going to speak about just when we use he, this is just as much for a woman as it is for a man. This is the creative, fun-loving, high-spirited sanguine's natural tendency to look on the bright side, to enjoy people, and to seek out adventure, sometimes results in a label of superficiality and frivolity. But the world is a brighter, more joyful place because of the inspiration, enthusiasm, and fellowship he provides. A strength of the sanguine is his ability to live in the present moment, because he does not dwell on the past, nor spend time worrying about the future. He is very optimistic. He has a very optimistic, joyful attitude toward life. The sanguine is often adventuresome, enterprising, creative, and is the source of inspiration to others. Although quickly and easily aroused to emotion or reaction, the sanguine does not regain the reaction for any length of time. His curiosity is easily picked, and his interest easily aroused, combined with his natural extroversion. This makes the sanguine typically friendly, outgoing, and communicative, always on the lookout for new adventures and new friends. He is very attuned to his five senses, which give him a good eye for detail and attention to appearance. This could also be a source of trouble if he becomes overly drawn to sensible pleasures and external attractions. Relationships are extremely important to sanguines. They are warm-hearted, compassionate, generous, and eager to please. They are energized by large groups and cooperative with and accepting of others. They want to please their parents and teachers. Their eagerness to please, however, sometimes at odds with the love of the limelight. Our sanguine son has received quite a few detentions, undeserved, he believes, for his attention-getting antics in the classroom. Sanguines love to be the center of attention, and they prefer quantity, not necessarily quality of friendships. They want to make others happy, or at least get a big laugh. The sanguine wears his emotions on his sleeve. Although these emotions are not long-lived and might be given to rashness, imprudence, and impulsivity. The sanguine child learns quickly, although he might have difficulty memorizing, continually discovering some new interest like butterflies flitting from flower to flower. Sanguines can find it difficult to attain great depth in one area of study. It is not that they don't have the intellectual capacity, but rather that their attention is so easily captured by something new. Weaknesses of the sanguine temperament include the tendency towards superficiality due to the immediacy of their reactions and their creative imaginations, inconstancy due to the short duration of their impressions, and sensuality, lacking the perseverance to withstand temptation once their passions are aroused. Because he places such a high value on relationships and pleasing others, a sanguine is often tempted to forsake what he knows is right in order to fit in with the crowd. The sanguine is likely to enjoy an occupation that highlights dealing with people. He will want to use his quick thinking creativity to come up with new ideas, projects, and ventures. Detailed, arduous tasks that require working independently, on the other hand, may be more of a struggle for the enthusiastic, sociable sanguine. In the spiritual life, the sanguine is less likely to fall prey to pharisaical legalism because he prioritizes relationships and freedom of expression. But when poorly formed in the faith, this tendency can lead to an undisciplined and incoherent set of beliefs based on personal preferences rather than on truth. When the life-loving, people-pleasing sanguine discovers, he says here, that Jesus Christ is where we just replace it with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the beauty of this deen, that he embarks on a journey towards spiritual maturity. Depth and constancy of personality will result. Such a journey will help discover who he truly is. Sanguines should be highly valued members of a family, organization, or religious community. They are self-giving, generous, cooperative, and loving. When motivated by love and with attention to spiritual formation, the sanguine will exhibit great energy and sensitivity and vivacity. And then I changed it in calling to Allah. So that's the sanguine. That's a summary of the sanguine. And these are just summaries, and you get even deeper into learning all of these things. So then we have the summer, the yellow bile, the fire people, the choleric. Enthusiasm, energy, intelligence, and a strong will combine to make the choleric temperament. You could say choleric or choleric. Both are correct pronunciations. The choleric temperament, a classic go-getter. Whether at home or on the job, the choleric will take charge and get many things accomplished in a short time. The choleric reacts quickly and intensely. Decisiveness is his hallmark. In addition, he is extroverted and self-confident, comfortable taking charge of people as well as situations. Opposition is never a stumbling block, but rather a further incentive to action. Dynamic and direct, the choleric has a keen mind and thinks independently. He will always let you know what he's thinking. The choleric's enthusiasm and energy will attract others to him. He thrives on activity. Work invigorates him. He is optimistic and magnanimous. He values success in his endeavors and sets high goals. He is comfortable with power, blossoms in competition, is confident in his decisions. Cholerics are eminently rational. They expect to hear good reasons for any argument. Even as children, they will not accept "because I said so" as sufficient reason for doing something. Cholerics can grasp the big picture and can communicate the vision to others. They are natural organizers and tend to rise to positions of authority. They easily express their ideas to others but are less willing to listen. They hate to waste time on meetings, employee relations, or small details. Many entrepreneurs are cholerics. They tend not to delegate because they believe they can do it better and faster themselves and because they enjoy their own productivity. A choleric can also be successful as a CEO, but a phlegmatic can also. There's not, in the West, CEOs tend to be choleric, but it's not the only model, right? Even in the West, let alone in the Islamic model. A choleric can also be successful as a CEO, a military leader, a founder, or in any other profession where his leadership and vision is valued. There is, of course, a downside to this driven, intense personality. The choleric is quick to judge, to form an opinion, and to charge ahead stubbornly, often without proper reflection, at times without compassion for people in his way. If you ever brought home something that has to be assembled and plunged right in without looking at the instructions, you may be a choleric. A choleric thinks that reading directions or studying them out before heading out is a waste of time. He can figure it out on the way. His intelligence, decisiveness, and high productivity make the choleric impatient with, sometimes even contemptuous of, those who are less talented. He can be domineering, obstinate, dictatorial, overly ambitious, and hard-hearted. He is prone to pride and anger. So when we talk about vices, of all of the temperaments, the choleric is most prone to kibba. That sometimes it can be seen. It can seem as though people are a secondary consideration to the choleric. A choleric who is not trying to grow in virtue can quickly become utilitarian in his approach, whatever works. If you are a choleric, do not be offended by the fact that many infamous dictators of history shared your temperament. Cholerics tend to lead with the strength of an idea, a goal, or sheer enthusiasm, rather than taking the time to mold, convince, or teach the people they are leading. It is equally true that many great saints are of this temperament. The choleric may fear intimacy in personal relationships. He is too independent, impatient, and insensitive. He can be rash and imprudent when making decisions and then deny that he has made an error. They will be valuable employees, though. If not the founder of a business, they are self-motivated, task-oriented, quick-thinking, pragmatic, and energetic. They enjoy their work. They enjoy leading projects and people, but sometimes need to be reminded that not everyone works as quickly as they do. Sometimes in their determination to achieve results, they can roll over their coworkers' feelings to accomplish the task at hand. A spiritual life marked by strict discipline and obedience is critical for the choleric. To help him overcome his tendencies to pride, anger, and obstinacy, he will need to develop compassion, humility, tenderness, and understanding to deal with others. But it will be first necessary to convince the choleric that he needs a spiritual life, that he can trust a spiritual director, so someone who's going to take him by the hand, like a murabbi, that he must humble himself before Allah and learn the virtue of obedience. He will learn to be more understanding and forgiving his fellow man and develop greater humility when he realizes that the natural gifts of his temperament are gifts from Allah. So the choleric is one of the quickest probably to feel entitled, is that they have to remember everything is from Allah, as everybody does as well. and are not something he personally earned or deserved. That's deep. See how deep this gets? And this is just touching the surface. I don't know about you all. This is, to me, is incredibly fascinating. Then we have the melancholic. So their element is earth, and their season is the fall. The melancholic, more than any other temperament, tends to value the ideal, whether it be truth, beauty, or justice, and all that is noble. He can be thoughtful, pious, and compassionate, given to solitude and reflection. So they're on the other side of the spectrum of the sanguine, just as the choleric is on the other side of the spectrum of the phlegmatic, who we'll hear about shortly. It is said that the melancholic so longs for heaven that everything on earth falls short. Sensitive and idealistic, he is deeply concerned about injustice and vice. His idealism, combined with compassion for humanity and passion for justice, may lead him to a humanitarian vocation. Great writers, poets, artists, and composers have been of this temperament. Many melancholics have become great saints, founders of religious orders, reformers, great mystics, and theologians. The melancholic is principled, consistent, faithful, and persevering. He is orderly, diligent, and attentive to detail. He appreciates the mystery and depth of life. But that same idealism of melancholics can also cause them to become critical or judgmental of others who don't measure up. This idealism lends itself to leadership skills, or sometimes causes melancholics to be impractical and intractable, yani not team players. They are skeptical about what may appear to be simplistic labels and categories, such as the four temperaments. The melancholic temperament is characterized by a weak or dull initial reaction to stimuli, the opposite of sanguine, followed by an increase in intensity over time. The reaction then tends to last a long time. So the sanguine reacts immediately, but then it fades quickly. The melancholic reacts much slowly, but then it intensifies over time. Because of their slowness to react and their tendency to introversion, melancholics base much of their decision-making on ideals. They long for perfection. No wonder they often have their nose in a book. Melancholics form relationships very slowly. In fact, they're usually quite content to be left alone. They do not initiate relationships, and it may take a long time for them really to trust. But when they do form a relationship, they will be faithful and true. Yet it is if their trust is violated and they become aware of their betrayal, they can be relentless in unforgiveness. The melancholic's reflective nature, combined with his goal of reaching perfection, will cause him to know all the difficulties of a new venture or a proposed project. Worry, which would drive the cleric crazy. Worry about the possible negative outcomes and pinpoint errors and injustices. The effect can paralyze the melancholic because they're not the doers. The melancholic longs for protection, and failing to achieve that may begin to lack self-confidence and become despondent. He sees problems, whereas other temperaments, such as the cleric, sees challenges or opportunities. Ironically, however, although small details can stump them, melancholics can often handle the truly big crises with grace. Why do melancholics sweat the small stuff but not the big stuff? We're not sure. One theory is that melancholics live their daily life with the expectation that any minute the other shoe will drop. So they incline towards more pessimism and negativity if it's not balanced. One melancholic we know always has a list of complaints ready. The kids are misbehaving. The job market looks grim. The in-laws are warring. But when serious illness threatened the family, the melancholic was calm under the pressure and drew upon spiritual strength. Because of their tendency to reflect on and weigh in every pro and con, melancholics can appear to be irresolute and indecisive. They may spend too much time on planning and preparing and too little time putting their plans into action. It is sometimes very difficult for them to bring others aboard a project because they don't know how to convey enthusiasm for it. Because of their introversion and their tendency to pessimism, they can easily become excessively self-absorbed. They should fight to place their trust in God. They need to strive to become attentive and generous to others in need. Self-pity is a trap that can keep the melancholic in a myopic, unproductive lifestyle. Teachers and parents can help their melancholic students and children by encouraging them to exercise regularly and to eat well and to learn to develop confidence, optimism, and enthusiasm. Sometimes the first step is most difficult. On the job, someone whose temperament is melancholic will be a great asset in any work requiring precision, detail, consistency, organization, and in-depth analysis. We know several melancholics who are editors, writers, educators, and financial analysts. Some are even your classic watchdogs sniffing out corporate shenanigans. Just don't ask them to make sales calls. That's hilarious. Also, don't expect them to be the most sensitive people managers. Melancholics can overlook necessary relational team building and motivational aspects of dealing with people. In his spiritual life, the melancholic should focus on, he said, personal intimacy with Jesus Christ, yani having a close connection with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Furthermore, only with this will the melancholic learn to temper his overly critical expectations of other people, and he should place his trust in Allah alone. A good spiritual director can help greatly the melancholic by helping him set prudential goals, remind him to take care of his healthy human needs, and to develop definitive spiritual resolutions. And that leads us to the fourth, which is the phlegmatic. Their element is water, and their season is winter. Phlegmatics are reserved, prudent, sensible, reflective, respectful, and dependable. They're not easily insulted or provoked to anger, nor are they given to exuberance or exaggeration in speech. They are loyal and committed, tolerant and supportive. They possess a hidden wall of iron that is often overlooked because they are such agreeable people. They have a knack for diffusing tense situations. They make superb diplomats and military strategists. They also make excellent firefighters, police officers, and military officers. They excel in professions where being calm under pressure is key. The good news is, if you are a phlegmatic temperament, you will not have to attend anger management courses. It takes a lot to rile a phlegmatic. They are known for their easygoing nature. They possess a great deal of common sense and mental balance. They tend to be clear, concise, and thoughtful in speech and writing. They are excellent listeners and have great empathy for others. They are supportive friends, patient with difficult people and situations, and considerate at all times. They are accepting of traditions and rules and will not buck the system. They can handle a bureaucratic system or one that has a clearly delineated hierarchy. They do not, however, like conflict or confrontation. On the job, phlegmatics are dependable, punctual, and orderly. They can bring harmony to almost any group. Their introversion, combined with their importance they place on relationships, attracts them to abstract goals such as love, patriotism, religion, and loyalty. They are, however, reluctant leaders. They prefer a job with security rather than one that is demanding and high-achieving. Many phlegmatics become teachers. The routine and security of the job appeal to them, and they are well equipped with the patience to deal with kids. Engineering, science, mechanics, and carpenter are also good fields for detail-oriented phlegmatics. In the religious life, it has been suggested that the monks who painstakingly produced the illuminated manuscripts were phlegmatic. Because of their reserved natures, phlegmatics are sometimes accused of being unassertive or lacking enthusiasm and spontaneity. Since they aim to please and want to avoid conflicts at all costs, they may become over-conciliatory. Sometimes they are so conciliatory that it appears that they don't even know what their own desires are. Unlike the sanguine, who is characterized by his attraction to things, people, experiences, novelties, and material objects, the phlegmatic is known for avoiding things, conflict amongst people, or demanding physical labor or mental exertion. The phlegmatic might defer to peer pressure in order to keep the peace or to avoid conflict, while the sanguine gravitates naturally to the thick of his peer group. Where the choleric needs to restrain himself, the phlegmatic needs to arouse himself. The choleric is passionate, the phlegmatic is dispassionate. Their detachment may appear to signal a lack of interest. A phlegmatic will exhibit this direct, dispassionate, and realistic approach to his work and studies. In the spiritual life, a phlegmatic may find it much easier to accept religious teachings. It may not be as inclined to argue. The dutiful and cooperative phlegmatic may need to be encouraged to internalize his faith. A good relationship with religious teachers will help encourage the phlegmatic to take an active role. If the phlegmatic does not perceive the vital necessity of his own personal contribution, he may end up simply being passive and never truly embracing a commitment, we changed it, to help spread the dawah. So the summary there is that each temperament has its own peculiar strengths and weaknesses. We should be aware of them and accept them, and also work to capitalize on the strengths and improve the weaknesses solely for the sake of Allah. However, we do not seek to understand our temperament simply so that we may have a handy excuse for our own bad behavior. Rather, we want to understand others better, improve our relationships, and become more effective in pursuing our goals. So that was a very long summary, but I really felt that that was really important. And the last two bullet points that we're just going to touch upon in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm going to point you to read more about them in this book, is the idea of temperaments in communication. So once we understand the basic temperaments, then the next thing that we really want to understand is that how it is that you and I can communicate with the other temperament. And this is really important because each one has unique ways that they need to be communicated with. And so this is some advice from the book that I have here, The Temperament God Gave You. So your choleric spouse, yani what are his emotional needs? Express appreciation for his achievements and contributions to your family, even if he appears indifferent to such expressions. If he gets it right, tell him so. Show loyalty. Criticism or sarcasm is used as a lack of loyalty. Defend your spouse. Challenge him to become more empathetic and to express appreciation. It doesn't mean you just go along with everything. You have to also help them get better, even when he doesn't agree. Help him to appreciate the process of relationships, empathy, encouragement, and non-judgmental listening, and not just the results. Help the choleric spouse find rejuvenating forms of relaxation. The choleric feels guilty when he relaxes. He doesn't like to relax. He likes to work. And so encourage him to relax. And then what should we do with if our spouse is melancholic? Some pieces of advice that affirm him. Again, we're just using him, and the same thing goes for females. Even when he doesn't ask for it, provide opportunities for solitude, reflection, and rejuvenation. So whereas the choleric wants to just solve the problem and move on, if your wife is melancholic, it doesn't work like that. You have to give her time. Or if the wife is choleric and the husband is melancholic, and she just wants to solve the problem and move on because it's eating her away, you can't do that. You have to give your husband time and let him process it and not push it. Offer support and appreciation. That's what the melancholic needs. Strive for order and fairness. Be radically accepting of him as a person and not just of his ideas and views. Okay, so what do you do if you're married to a sanguine? Make joy a priority and not a frivolity. Enjoy fun times with your spouse. So if the sanguine is with a boring spouse of a different temperament, it's going to be a trial for him or her. Give plenty of overt attention. Sanguines need attention, right? And displays of affection. Tell him you appreciate his optimism, enthusiasm. Go on a weekly date with your saying, okay, Yani, go out with them, right? And then it talks about romance, intimacy. Allow your spouse to entertain friends or volunteer for the local mosque or community. But help him not become overextended. Support your sanguine spouse when the details become overwhelming or when he needs to undertake a long-term, in-depth project, because that's hard for them. These are very valuable things. And then finally, the phlegmatic. What is the advice? Acknowledge him openly, especially his easygoing nature and his sensitivity to others' needs. Use words of affirmation. Give him time for relaxation. Praise him when he takes a leadership stance. Boost his confidence to continue taking on challenges. Use gentle reminders, but don't nag him, dump on him, criticize him, or take over him. Be specific in your requests and state them positively. So these are just a few things, and there's a lot more details in this book. And then what it goes to, and so this is the temperament God gave you, and then there's a whole other book, The Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, where he goes into more detail. And then he talks about temperament combinations in marriage. We're not going to cover that because we're out of time. But I really highly suggest that after you think you have a broad idea of what your temperament is, to look at the temperament combination and the advice that they have. And so then they talk about parenting and parent-child combinations. Really useful. Really useful. And again, we don't learn about temperaments to label other people, let alone to criticize other people. We do it to build understanding. And no temperament is negative unless it becomes imbalanced. And every temperament but ultimately you could be from the kibar of the awliya and the salihin and a knower of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the beauty, is that to maximize your Adamic potential that exists at a level of your being that's much deeper than your temperament. Because when we talk about the ruh is beyond temperament. The ruh is how that we love our Lord. And your heart is beyond temperament. That's how we know our Lord. That's deeper. And that all of the different temperaments then is that if that our ruh and our qalb dominate us, and we're people who outwardly observe the limits of Allah and strive in the spiritual path to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all different temperaments can reach the highest degree of siddiqiyah, the highest degree that someone can reach after being a prophet. And no one can be a prophet except those who Allah ta'ala makes them prophets, is to be from the siddiqeen. وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, فَأُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, those are they who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed His favor upon. مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَالصَّالِحِينَ, from the prophets, the siddiqeen, the highest saints, the greatest rank after prophethood, and the martyrs and the righteous, and that وَحَسَنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا, these are the very best people to have the companionship of. These are the people that we want to be like, and coming to know your temperament will help you maximize your particular potential that Allah Ta'ala has blessed you with, and to make your contribution in whatever way that is. And so temperament is really important, and I felt that this was, if we're going to discuss marriage, there had to be a session on temperament. For those that want to learn more about this, that alhamdulillah, we're very blessed in May to have a few programs by visiting Hakim Salim Khan, who the Faqir learned from a short period of time, that my better half learned from for a much longer period of time. It's one of her primary teachers that taught her herbal medicine and that naturopathy. And he'll be here, alhamdulillah, for almost a month with us, and he'll offer, I think, level 1 and at least 2 and maybe even more levels of his program of training that clinicians. But even if someone's not going to become a clinician, it's highly, highly recommended to take at least level 1, if not the first 2 levels, and you'll benefit immensely. And I wouldn't be exaggerating if I would say that it's short of being life-changing. And I'm not saying that benefit anything financial or anything from the program. That in a very real way, whoever wants to come benefit, ahlan wa sahlan. If you don't, that's up to you. It's benefit. It's a great benefit. It really is. And it could really, really help you know yourself. It could help you in that marriage and in all of your other relationships. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to give us tawfiq and to give us knowledge of self, and to bless us to that understand our faults and to be able to overcome them, and to that see our virtues as being solely from Him. And may Allah Ta'ala that adorn our hearts with everything that is pleasing to Him, and bless us to completely follow and resemble our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam inwardly and outwardly, who is the greatest exemplar for humanity, and people of all temperaments and all different backgrounds and all the different things that distinguish us ultimately can find in Him the greatest good. And to the extent that we follow Him is to the extent that we will be close to our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us in all of our affairs, and the remaining moments of this retreat, may Allah ta'ala fill them with immense barakah, whereby which that we can come to understand the realities of this deen and put them into practice. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Assalamu alaikum. MashaAllah. How many people here learned something new? Allah. Beautiful. This is what it's all about. It's about increasing our knowledge and finding out where we are in the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, increasing that. Alhamdulillah. Actually, subhanAllah, back in 2014, I took a temperament test. It wasn't this one. It was called Discovery Insights. I took it. I made my wife take it. I didn't make her take it. She actually took it on her own. And then we went out to dinner together, and we actually swapped reports. So they give you like a 10-page report on like all the different things and what you're good at, what you're not good at, your blind spots, and then you kind of swap. So I think she was pregnant with